Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons.
Hey, this is Arlene.
Hi, this is Grace.
And of course, our tech segment here, we will be going all the way to Australia, Melbourne, to talk about the property there. Why we need to talk about property in Melbourne again? But actually, we are going to talk about buying right in Melbourne because apparently more and more people from Southeast Asia, not just Southeast Asia, but Asia as a whole, are looking at Australia, in particularly places like Melbourne, to seek for property.
And in fact, a lot of Malaysians, they do actually go to Australia for different purposes like business or education. So it will be a good chance for them to educate themselves about the Melbourne property market.
So we have here a former Malaysian, unfortunately, Erick on the line. Hi.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Hi, Arlene and Grace.
Hi, Erick. You are a property rights advocate.
Yes, I'm a property buying advocate. We call that, an advocate or a buyer's agent in Australia. Yes, this profession actually, I don't think it exists in Asia, but it's quite,
this is the first time. I call it rights because it seems like you are trying to defend their rights as a property buyer advocate.
Yes. We represent property buyers only, so we are independent.
So a bit of your background on how did you came about this profession and why you end up in Melbourne and not in Malaysia?
Look, I came to Melbourne to study architecture, and after that I graduated. I was working as an architect, and one of the pastimes during the weekends is to look at properties, and I started to invest in properties. And how I came across this profession called buyer's advocate is I personally have actually hired a buyer's advocate myself before I became one. So I'm very familiar with the industry and how it works and the benefits for the property buyers.
But why in Australia, in particularly Melbourne, you need that kind of people to advise you, a property buyer advocate to advise you? Why not in Southeast Asia?
Actually, it's a very interesting question, and it's a really good question because whenever I travel to Kuala Lumpur or Singapore, I get asked by friends and say, why don't you relocate back to Asia and help us to find the best property? A lot of people are confused on, what property and which one to buy. So I think there is merits in if it exists in Asia, but in Australia, as a real estate professional, you either be helping the seller or the buyer, because the legislation here says if you're representing the seller to sell property, you are looking after their interests. You want to get them the highest price. You want to get the best term for the seller as a real estate agent. Whereas if you want to help the buyer, you got to be a buyer's agent, and you exclusively only look after the interests of the buyer. So if someone actually do both, it's actually a conflict of interest. But I understand in Malaysia or in most part of Asia would be they call it a broker, even though agent they help both. And it's just different way of working,
So how long you have been involved in this industry?
I've actually personally we have set up this service since 2008, so that's about 6 years now. A lot of my experience come from my own personal investing as well as my own observation of the market since my architecture days. So yeah, it's gone back maybe since 2005.
So when it comes to property, buying property, do you see a different kind of trend happening within people in Southeast Asia and people within Asian region, and also the locals from Australia?
Yes, there's a difference between how locals buy and also overseas foreigners buy. The main criteria for that allow overseas property buyers to buy, they have a restriction whereby they only can buy new properties, which is mostly off the plan, whereas the locals can buy everything, anything. They have no restrictions. So in that sense, the overseas buyers have very limited scope and in the market. So
then how would you encourage foreigners to actually buy all those properties if they have certain restrictions and limitations?
Yes, that's a very good question, because a lot of people want to buy a good property, and
exactly.
It's very hard to actually find and identify which one is good, because how property developments work here, for example, in Asia, a lot of people like to buy off the plan, right? Mm-hmm. And selling off the plan to Asians becoming like almost like the norm, because the locals, as in, I'm generalizing here because it can be a big topic. Now, if a local, they will want to buy somewhere that they know it's good performing, and they are familiar with the areas and they know it very well. Whereas overseas, they're not here, so they have to rely on information given by sellers or salespeople or developers to actually make the decision. Whereas the locals can do their own independent research here. They grow up here. They know which area is good, which area is not so good, not to go into. Whereas overseas buyers have lacked those resources. They really have not many people or nowhere to look up for these answers. So there are professions like us or other property advisors who specifically can be hired to advise property buyers, whether they're overseas or locals, to buy the best property for them.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to I mean, you involving in this for quite some time already. You personally, did you ever, try to buy properties in Southeast Asia, and also try to buy properties in Melbourne? And did you find any differences when it comes to the way people, the culture and the way people approach on the subject of property buying?
I have not bought any properties in Southeast Asia. I bought in Australia, okay, and as well as New Zealand. So these two countries. Now, how I know a lot of differences are, I have a lot of friends who sell property in Asia. There are developers there as well as developers here, and there's always the cultural differences is. Now in Asia, a lot of times big developments happens really huge, large scale. And for some parts of Asia, whereby, like for example, Singapore, people live in high rises, right? So they're used to buying high rises, right in the city center where all the transports are. Whereas in Melbourne, it's still a relatively new concept and it's evolving, right? Now, in Melbourne, that at the moment, in this city, we have the largest development ever happening in Melbourne. There are so many towers going up, and a lot of times the investors are actually from Asia. The reason why is that a lot of, say, locals are not really into living in an apartment, whereas to some people who actually live in Southeast Asia are used to the concept of living in an apartment right in the city. So for a developer, it's easier to sell to the overseas market.
So they use the language and the kind of cultural background of Southeast Asian people, but approach it but repackage it in Melbourne. Would that be what you meant?
They target like the buyers and package in such a way that is appeal to them.
Mm-hmm. So for Southeast
example,
Asian, for Southeast Asian like myself, living in the city is better than living outside of the city. That's why people would rather pay more for properties within the city. But perhaps in Melbourne, the culture is totally the opposite.
That's correct. It's actually very different here. Having said that, is that there's growing trend of the transition. Okay, so now the Melbourne city centre used to be only for working. Like people come to the city is to go to work, and after that they go home and they go back to their suburbs and they actually socialize in the suburbs. But now recent years has seen the government opening up these prime locations for residential property developers. So a lot of developers from Southeast Asia and also China is coming in to grab a piece of the action to build apartments. So now the city, Melbourne as a city is always growing. There's always people coming into the city. And there's always undersupply of good properties. Now the keyword here is good properties. Now a lot of supply is coming out in the Melbourne CBD. It doesn't mean they are good properties because it depends on the supply and demand issue. So if there's too many supply and the demand is not so much, then the price and the appeal of the property is not so much. But a lot of the overseas buyers are unaware of these things. They think living right in the city is the best thing ever, but they don't know a lot of intricacy. For example, for them, they are overseas buyer. They can buy this brand new and off the plan, but when they want to sell it, they can't sell it to overseas buyers. So they have very limited resale value to the locals. So that's why a lot of times a lot of industry insiders have come back with values that 20% lower than what they have bought for, and becomes a glut. It's actually a very major problem here at the moment because not many people has voiced up that there's these huge problems here.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Why not many people have voiced out? Is there like an underlying cultural, preference to not talk about problems?
I think there's some degree of people have voiced up. For example, there are people who advocates for buyers or who help buyers to tell the media that there's impending glut of oversupply in certain areas, not all areas, okay? And now, but not everybody are exposed to this media, or they're not actually in Australia, right? They're buying from overseas. They're not in tune to the local news, okay? Now, property investing is actually a very personal thing, and I find that a lot of investors tend to they don't really want to tell you the whole story because it reveals a lot of their finances and their plans and probably some mistakes. Now, a lot of people make mistakes too, but if you can avoid it, why do you want to make them, right? But it's not something that people like to openly talk about. There are forums, there are groups that they would voice up to, but generally speaking, you don't tell all the bad properties that you have bought. Personally, I've known people who bought a lot of properties and they lost money, whether they're overseas or locals, and they are very reluctant to talk about it until to a point where they trust you. Then they tell you they shouldn't have done that, they should have listened to somebody, they have trust the wrong people and things like that. So it's a very personal thing. That's why people don't talk about it much.
I see. When it comes to property buyers from Southeast Asia, if you compare it to East Asia like China, is there any differences?
There is. One major difference is that many Southeast Asians do speak English, and in that sense, contract-wise, they can peruse and have a bit of a look. Whereas from East Asia like China, maybe they are not their main language in English, so a lot of the times they sign contracts without knowing they're signing a contract. So they've been so deceived by the selling agent saying maybe this is an offer. So they are not familiar with the process. They thought it's in China, but it's not. So, whereas Southeast Asian has an advantage where if, say, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, English is, quite widely spoken, so it's easier to talk to the sales agents.
Let's go back to Melbourne. What is the current property outlook of Melbourne if you want to talk about whether the land property in Melbourne is something that is sought after or is something, or they are facing a glut now when it comes to the development of houses and properties?
Okay. Now, Melbourne has, there's something called a property clock where, there's going up, rising, and then going down and slow down. So the property clock will dictate where smart investors should invest and things like that. Melbourne has a patchy market where different places are performing differently. At the moment, the more established area, and we call it the blue chip areas, are very sought after and going up, at least 10% per annum, and some even more. Whereas other parts are, for example, an oversupply situation, probably in some parts of the CBD, and also outer rings house and land packages are actually, doing not so good because of an oversupply. So in that regards, the established areas are actually on the top of the market at the moment, and the oversupply situation is right at the bottom, and possibly negative. Yeah.
When it comes to hot properties, usually are they properties that are being newly developed or properties that only Australians can access?
I think this depends on the criteria why people are buying the property. There are good properties for new properties as well as established. So as long as it suits the buyer, whether it's an owner-occupier, investor, or a redevelopment. Now, good property usually are always the lesser amount, the minority. And for example, there are some very good developers or good development in strategic location and positions that we are very familiar with. They get snapped up behind the scenes. If you know people, if you are very into the market, it's very easy for you to access this market. Whereas as a general public, it can be a bit difficult for them. Not to say that they can't, it's just that they need experience to identify to where to look, and how do you filter it. So there are good properties around. Yes.
We talked about the criteria before. Then what are the criteria, the key criteria in choosing the property, and what's the ideal property that are mainly chosen by the people there in Melbourne?
There's a range of buyers. If someone actually say overseas investor, they're limited by what they buy, so they usually will buy like the new developments. So if they're buying to stay in, because sometimes people want to stay in for a while and then turn an investment and a bit of both. And this also includes a lot of Southeast Asians who buy here for their children's education.
Yep.
Because Melbourne is actually an education capital of Australia. There's a lot of good universities here.
Yep.
And they buy for the children to live in. So if they want that kind of criteria, then they want to buy near universities. So that would be a key criteria for them. But buying near university not necessarily means it's a good returns, or not necessarily means good capital growth, because there could be oversupply situation, and also there are gluts of student apartments where a lot of Southeast Asians tend to buy, but they buy into it and then a lot of them can't sell it.
Oh, they buy it, they can't sell it.
That's correct, because they always think renting to students is a good idea, but a lot of times in the local mindset is that if we are a property investor in Melbourne, we do not want to rent to the students if possible. So we avoid renting to students.
But why not renting to students?
Or is it because we have the different mindsets?
It is true. We think differently, because if you live here, it's better to rent to someone who, for example, a professional like a doctor, a very stable income, and there is a property management industry which regulates that. Okay, whereas in maybe other countries you don't have property managers. Property managers here means they look after your property, so they help you to lease it out and they vet the tenants, and the tenants have to apply. So, for example, there's some a property for lease, and all the tenants will apply, and then the property managers will screen through whether they are good tenants or bad tenants. Do they have money to pay rent, and so on and so forth. So they even sometimes have to call their employers, and they have to have to show that their bank account they have money, things like that.
So it's it's a long process. It's the whole procedure where it's between tenants, and then to be able to secure and also to make sure that they can actually pay monthly or the yearly based, but then when it comes to students, it's a bit more it's not stable enough because they are still studying, so they may not have a regular income.
That's correct. They don't have regular income. Most of them, they can show, some parents will put in a lump sum money to show they have some amount. But the problem comes when the maintenance of the property is not kept, because being students, I've been a student before, maybe you're not the neatest, you don't look after the property because it's not your own. So personally, I also know quite a few investors who buy into this kind of student apartments. They have to pay a lot to rectify a lot of the problems that the student have caused. So yes, so it can look like a slum in some student. And for the property investor, the landlord, it can be a headache trying to get them to take care of the property.
So it's a totally different ball game when it comes to buying properties in Melbourne. We are going to take a short break. When we return, we will talk more about what about the law and regulations in Melbourne.
ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons.
Hey, we are back again. This is Arlene.
This is Grace.
And of course, with us is Erick Ng. Hey, Erick.
Hello.
Hey, so continuing our discussion, I'm talking too fast, about buying property in Melbourne. Of course, my first question, my curiosity is about who are your usual clients, and usually when they approach you, what are the common mistakes that they would commit when buying property?
I have a large diversity of clients. It can be first-time buyer, our investor, to professional investor who have a large portfolio, from moms and dads, professional students, some actually celebrity, and even Olympian, government personnel and businessmen and expats. So wide variety, basically. Yes. Now, some of them I've actually rescued them from buying the property that they wanted to, because they don't know what they don't know. So it's all about education, and so that the decision making skills are different. Okay. So the more they know, the more they'll buy different things. But there are a lot of mistakes, which I won't point out everything, but maybe the top mistakes of buyers who actually don't use a consultant. The number one is that a lot of times they do not think about the exit strategy. So they don't know. It's very easy to buy something, right? But they didn't think of a bigger picture. Okay. And buying property also sometimes a lot of emotion. And sometimes if people go to a seminar, it becomes like persuaded into making a decision like that. So they buy with an emotion, but they only rationalize their decision later. But it's too late. Yes.
But okay, sorry to cut you off, because to blame the buyers is one thing, but the reality is, I'm just giving an example of Malaysia. There's a lot of property developers and their PR people actually come down doing road shows all over Malaysia, in major cities, to promote all these really really exciting and really beautiful property market in different areas in Australia, including Melbourne. And for buyers not knowing anything coming from Southeast Asia, except from word of mouth, they could only the only person that they could trust is probably the person who are giving them advice about buying property. So, and for Southeast Asian, of course, buying a piece of land outside of Southeast Asia is a dream. It's like the Australian dream, I would say.
Yeah, it seemed like so. Yes.
So how can we justify that? How can buyers be enlightened when they don't have any places to go to buy to seek for advice?
Yes, you're right. A lot of road shows and seminars are conducted in all across Asia, and because it's very easy for property developers to sell it to them because of the mentality and mindset of these overseas buyers. Now, if they try to do it here, they're not going to do very well because the locals are not going to buy like that. They don't buy property going to seminars. Okay. I mean, they are, but a lot of times they're used to being, like scam, all sorts of scams are running around to a point where the government is really, scrutinizing more. But of course, there's not enough legislation to prevent a lot of these scammers are trying to spruik. We call it spruik properties. That means they upsell it, but in reality, it's not that great. Images in sales, of course, if I'm putting a property developer's hat on, I want to sell, as much as possible and as quick as possible. So they'll go to the easiest market to sell them. But as a buyer, then they have to be the one that assess whether the property is a good deal for them. Yes, it is actually quite difficult for them to find independent information. Even online, it's so many information. It can be, the more you read, the more confused you are. So obviously there are professionals such as us, or buyers agents, or property advisors around in Melbourne. There's actually a growing industry to actually help property buyers to navigate this minefield. But of course, this concept is not as common in Southeast Asia, so they may not be aware that there's such a service available. But once they are aware, a lot of my clients are Southeast Asians, and they say, look, we really want something that is, not going to lose money, basically. And
I like when you say lose money because it sounds very Asian. I'm not going to lose money.
I'm still Asian.
So yeah.
So yes, they have to do their own research. If they have, they usually ask their relatives or friends who are actually in Australia to help them. But many times, a lot of these friends are not in the property industry, so they have limited way they can help. So that's why a lot of them actually refer to us and by word of mouth, because our kind of industry, which is helping the buyers, you really have to go by word of mouth, how reputable you are. It's very hard to tell the world like what, how good you are. So it's because you have done a good job for somebody else and people want to, use your service. So they can opt for that, or the other way is really to come on the ground and be a local, think like a local, okay, and personalize their investments, not just thinking that's good means it's good. For example, a lot of buyers from overseas, they come to me, they already have something in mind to buy. So they tell me, Eric, is this good? Is this a good investment? Then my question always come back is, it depends. Good for what kind of budget, what kind of strategy are you investing, how many you want to buy, things like that. So it actually depends a lot of things. So whereas a lot of people's mindset maybe there's something called a good area, just buying there, but it is not true, because a good area can have also bad properties. So if you're not careful, you can buy into the bad properties. Yeah. So.
So when it comes to buying property in Melbourne, understanding that Melbourne is under the the city council jurisdiction, but is there any overlapping of laws and regulations when it comes to property, like between the Victorian government and the Melbourne City Council?
Yes, there is a bit of overlapping and sort of conflict as well. At the moment is because of the sheer amount of property developments coming out in Melbourne CBD, this whole CBD skyline is going to change. It's exciting as well as it's a bit of worrying because there are some very not so good properties are being built.
And they're being built by local or foreign developers?
That's a very sensitive question. Now, a lot of developers now are actually from overseas. So there are locals as well, but there are a lot of overseas conglomerate and big companies and even government funds buying lands in prime CBD sites and developing apartments and sell back to their home country. Sometimes even bypassing the Melbourne because, well, the overseas buyers will buy them, whereas the locals probably won't. So it's better to sell it to overseas.
So
now,
yeah.
Now I want to answer you in regards to the Melbourne City Council. The Melbourne City Council predominantly approves, obviously, what's going to be built in the area, what affects the local population and the residents. So they are quite stringent in approving what is allowed to build. But there is, there's another way of a lot of property developers get out of this scrutiny by, their sites are gross floor areas more than 25,000 square meters. It will go directly to the planning minister. So the planning minister will approve these projects rather than the local council. Now, the local council wants to protect the amenities, the public transport, so that's not overcrowded. Whereas the state government actually focus more on the bigger picture and encouraging investment from overseas as well as local to build up the whole state. In the state government's view is that yes, we are growing population. Where do we put all these new people, the new migrants? Australia is a migrant country, so there's always migrants coming, and either you cram up all these suburbs or you go up. So the planning minister say, look, we're gonna go up. So a lot of high rises are coming on board, which is not really usual for Melbourne. A lot of locals don't like to live in high rises. Now, but so the state government is encouraging this flow of money coming in from overseas. Whereas the Melbourne City Council is a bit more, a bit of an alarm going on. Oh, look, we're going to have too many people and not enough amenities for everyone. The apartments are getting smaller and smaller. They are looking like dog boxes and shoe boxes. We call them that because they are very tiny. It could be the norm in Hong Kong, but maybe not here. So obviously the people who buy into these apartments will be a lot of people who live in high rises. They like them.
What is the actual geography and demographic of Melbourne? Because you mentioned that a lot of people would prefer to live in the suburb than going to than staying in the city and as well as working in the city at the same time. Why the culture is the reverse of Southeast Asia?
Now I think there's many ways to look into this. The Melbournians who grow up here, they usually grow up in the suburbs, okay? And if they have a job in the city, they'll take a public transport to the city and then they go back home, okay? And then there are migrant community who are they're born in other countries, but they are they're used to being very convenient to shops and groceries just downstairs and things like that. So to them, this is their culture. Whereas the local culture is like, well, I'm going to the local pub, I'm going to the suburbs. They don't like the traffic, the noise. Buying next to the shopping center is a big no-no. Whereas some Asians probably buyers may think, oh, that's great, so convenient. It's
yeah,
right
exactly.
next.
I think it's a culture in Malaysia where people actually build apartments above shopping centers. and next to it would be office buildings.
That's correct. And this culture is actually coming to Melbourne, where they are starting to look like Asia a little bit.
So there will be small Asia town.
Yes. Even there are some very good models of Asian developments, whereby you have transport hubs, commercial shops, and residents right up, apartments. And this is becoming actually more and more common here as well, because prime land is getting scarce, and people don't want to live too far away.
So that's one of the attraction points, having like shopping malls for the convenience purposes.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that the cost there is also a bit higher than the other areas.
In the past, buying into a very busy area where there's a lot of traffic jams and a lot of shops, people avoid it.
Yeah.
But because of the influx of Asian migrants, this kind of criteria becoming more attractive to them, because they don't like to walk. They just want something right on the doorstep.
Yeah.
Probably because that they want to live right next to, say, somewhere. For example, I used to live in Malaysia, where I want to drive right to the doorstep of the shop. Whereas the locals they don't mind walking because the weather is great.
Their weather is great. I can't imagine walking under the hot sun in Malaysia and dusty, hot weather.
And it's very safe here to cycle. It's a very green mode of transportation. A lot of big CEOs and big company directors, there's a cycling culture amongst them. Whereas you don't see maybe Asian businessmen cycling into their workplace.
So
it's quite different.
Yeah, it is different, definitely. The environment is different. The cultures are different from Malaysia or any other Southeast Asia countries. But with your insights and your experiences, how can buyers avoid from being cheated? Or do you recommend any websites they can go to and get advice from, or any workshops or seminars that they can attend to?
Or probably no seminars at all. Apparently, Australians don't go to seminars.
Now, yes, there's a few things they can do. First of all, the most important thing overseas buyer have to know is the timing of the market, when to come in. Because if they time it correctly, they can buy something and lock in at a price, say, off the plan price, and after 2 years, it has grown up in value. Okay, and in some cases, actually, this has happened and they have profited from it. Whereas, if they come in at the wrong market where, there's so many properties available, they don't know about it from overseas point of view. They bought into it, and then after 2 years later, it's actually valued, say, 20% lower. They have to fork out, their own higher deposit, and if they want to sell it, they can't, because they have to get even a heavy discounting, because there's so many others out there. Why would people want to buy yours when there's newer and more exciting developments out there? So
True.
So when property buyers don't buy the best property, they run into the risk of not be able to profit from their properties, because there's so many out of the same thing. Okay, so the timing is one thing. Second of all is they have to think like a local. Like, it's best to think and to buy like, what are the resale values for, this kind of property, not just buy new, because when you buy new, you're paying a premium already, maybe 20 to 30, 40% more premium than an existing property. So they must know, well, if they buy in that price, what is the resale value of that kind of property when it's completed. So they've got to think like that. And also they personalize their investment rather than going to follow the herd. Okay. And high standards of due diligence is what they should do. It's not like going to buy grocery, or things like that, or go to a supermarket, you get a refund if you bought something wrong. But properties can be costly to reverse the mistakes. Okay. Websites wise, there are a lot of websites out there which have resources for property buyers. I would suggest property buyers to always learn how to filter information, and the other way, the best way is to actually find someone who specifically know about the local market to cut down the time of them doing the research. So yes, you can hire people who specific to give those kind of advice.
So with that, unfortunately, we are at the end of our show. So Erick, if they want to read more about your advice on all the different issues related to property buying in Melbourne, do you have any columns that they can access to?
Yes, I'm a real estate columnist for a Melbourne Malaysian magazine called Jom Magazine. It's a bi-monthly publication dedicated to a lot of especially migrants coming in to buy properties in Melbourne. So they can go to the Jom website or Jom Facebook page, and I have my articles there. Alternatively, they also can follow me in LinkedIn or Twitter, and they can learn more about property buying in Melbourne.
Erick Ng, ERICKNG.
Yes, correct.
Okay, with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Erick.